Hello. Thank you all for coming. My name is Lolita Cros, and I'm the founder and curator of the Salon at the Wing, the permanent exhibition on view in all spaces. For tonight's Salon Series, I'm thrilled to be introducing salon artist Alex Prager, who's featured at the entrance of the space when you walk in. Based in Los Angeles, Alex Prager is a photographer and filmmaker who creates elaborately staged scenes that expose various aspects of everyday life. Inspired by a wide range of references from Hollywood cinema to street photography, Prager has exhibited works internationally, from the Foam Photography Museum to Amsterdam to the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C. Also joining us tonight is Fionna Flaherty, director of the Lehmann Maupin Gallery, where Alex's upcoming show, opening tomorrow, Play the Wind, is on view. So tonight, we'll be starting by showing you a little bit of a wide range of Alex's work, starting with the newest piece. And this is a teaser from the video that will be playing tomorrow at the show. So hope you enjoy it, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. So Alex, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Play the Wind is about nostalgia and memory, and maybe one of your most personal work. Can you talk a little bit about the whole series and how this movie ties in with the rest of the show?
Yes, I guess Play the Wind is one of my first, it's actually my first project, I think, that I conceived as a film and photographs. I think before that I was either making something as a film and then as an afterthought, I was thinking, because the production is so thought out and meticulous, and there's so many scenes within the film that say something else as still images, then after I would think of it as a film, then they would become photographs as I was involved in the production of the film. And the other way around, which is how a lot of my films got made, which is that I would think of a photograph and then it would evolve into a film project. So this is the first one, I think, because I've been working in a lot more motion recently, and my mind is thinking about things in moving pictures now more than ever before. This is the first time I thought of it together, and it's also interesting because the still images are very different to me. They mean something very different than the film does in motion. But Play the Wind, it's such a hard question that you asked me because I have so much to say about it. It's probably my most autobiographical in a way because it is so much about nostalgia. I came about the project because I had a show set with Lehmann Maupin. We couldn't push the date back anymore, and I was really struggling to figure out what I was gonna say. And I knew that I had a career mostly in photography, but I didn't want to make pictures. I wanted to make a bigger, maybe a feature film or something bigger and longer. And so I kept feeling this pressure to make a show of photographs, and I didn't have any ideas. So this is probably too much information. My gallery is probably cringing. But so I was really struggling for a while, and I kept pushing them off and pushing them off. And at the same time, I had just finished my first monograph, looking back at all my work that I'd ever made since I started. So 10 years or a little bit more of work. And I'd started showing that around in London and Europe. And at the same time, I just had my first son, Francis, my first child. And of course, that threw me backwards into memories of growing up in Los Angeles as a single woman with so much freedom and just being able to get up and do whatever I wanted. And also the way that I used to approach photography with such love and passion, because it was new to me and I was infatuated with everything about it. And I didn't feel that anymore. I felt I felt like someone that had been making pictures for 10 years. And so I kind of reached and this has always been my relationship with photography, which is why I found motion pretty early on. But this time it felt more stale than ever. And
this work is also referencing a lot of your past work.
well, yeah, because then I realized that the show had to be about this exact feeling, these conflicting feelings of feeling like I have to go backwards into my photography career. Feeling drawn back to my past as a young woman growing up in Los Angeles, seeing how the city was changing so much, and just so many things were telling me that this show had to be about that, and nostalgia was the running theme throughout all of it. It's this feeling of longing and this fear of moving forward, but also knowing that I love where I am at right now. I wouldn't want anything to change, and I'm excited about everything to come. This is actually.
You also were like very aware of your past work when you were working on that museum show. I feel like you approached it with your new kind of perspective, and you saw it in a different way, and so that made it fresh again for you in a really interesting way where you could reference it that didn't feel stale and allowed you to kind of readdress it.
It did,
really
yeah. I reimagined some of my works because I've collected props and wigs and costumes and places and ideas and memories and things that I think happened, but my sister will disagree with me, and like all of these things, movies that have been shot in Los Angeles, and all of that kind of ended up in this work. Like this picture is, I call it Rancho Mirage. It's partially based on a Joel Sternfeld image that I was always in love with from the moment I discovered his work a long time ago, as well as a picture that I made in 2008 of a woman, kind of, if you would imagine being on top of that, on the street up above, looking out this way. There's a photograph of a woman getting her car battery jumped, while a red car drives past. Mm-hmm. And so if you imagine this picture being taken moments later down the road, then it's a continuation of something I shot in 2008, as well as a continuation of a passion I felt for Joel Sternfeld's work very early on that inspired a lot of my work. So a lot of the pictures kind of have many layers of meaning for me.
In a way, you're creating a narration with what you're talking about, because you're telling me that you've done something at a certain point of your career that you're then thinking back and then adding on to the story as like a before and an after that photo was taken. How do you separate that from your film work, for instance?
The photographs allow me to capture many different stories and ideas about a lot of different things that might not have anything to do with each other, except that they ended up in the same frame accidentally or spontaneously, who knows. But that's something that I realized. Since I discovered film, my love for it has only grown and grown, and I've only felt more and more challenged by each coming project. But this was the first project that made me see the things that it lacked, the things I couldn't do with motion, because there were so many things in Play the Wind, the film that is going to be at my opening tomorrow. It's 8 minutes long. Yep. But there were
6 to 8 p.m.
But there were so many things that I wanted people to notice in Play the Wind. I have so many details in there, like my Aunt Edie, when I was growing up, she always had this plastic pair of red lips that she had on her keychain. And I have such a deep memory attached to those plastic red lips. They're like oversized, like this big, and you could actually put your hand in them and use them as like a knuckle, like a knuckle brace.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it was something she had in the 80s when I was growing up. And So those ended up in the film, and there was just so many details. My sister is in a lot of the pictures, my mother, a lot of my friends and favorite extras that I grew up with, or that I grew up taking pictures with. And when you watch the film, you don't really see any of that, because what you're really focusing on is the story between this man and this woman. And when I realized that, it made me have a deeper appreciation for the still photographs, because I can put all of those things in, and people have years and hopefully centuries to examine all of those details and all the different stories.
You're talking about all these objects that you grew up with. I'm just thinking about it now, having your own child now. Is that a way also for you to bring back those objects into more contemporary times by bringing them into your contemporary work?
Yeah, I mean, the work is really not set in any particular time. I think the feeling of the past is very strong throughout all of it, but it's not meant to feel like one specific time period. I think the way time works and memories work it's not really dependent on days going by or weeks going by. It changes constantly depending on how you're feeling.
Well, it's interesting because I think that you play with fiction and reality in such a clever way. And when you're dealing with this idea of the malleability of space and time and memory, you're actually hitting upon the reality of experience in a really, really, in its like truest, most honest form, where it might not actually be like something possible that we're looking at. It's actually how it happened, because it speaks to our experience or our memory of it, which is a much more complicated thing, I think, than a straightforward narrative.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the city of Los Angeles, the character in your film and your photo. In the press release, actually, for the show, they were talking about Keith Haring kind of like personifying New York, and Toulouse-Lautrec personifying Paris, and I feel like you really do that with Los Angeles. Can you talk about what role that character plays?
I mean, Los Angeles is constantly running through everything that I do, because I grew up there, and it's there's so many things about the city that are really ugly and despicable. I don't know if you've ever been to LA, but you really have, in a way, London is probably the most similar to me, because you can't just walk off the tube and just have a great time like you can in New York. You kind of have to know where to go in the city. You have to know people and get recommendations. And Los Angeles has this incredible backdrop that's just insanely beautiful, and the blue sky and the birds, and there's this feeling of glamour that's just like forever out of reach because of Hollywood and all of that, and also kind of strange, and you really don't want to be a part of it, even though you're like wondering what they're all up to. And then there's the people of LA that live there, and there's and the seedy underbelly of just weird little things happening, and strange glimpses of things that you might drive by, and a lot of times, I mean, this is why when I was making Play the Wind, I wanted it to start with a man driving through the city, because I really wanted to show the real Los Angeles, and the way it feels to drive in your car, and this kind of meditation that happens, or I don't know, that you think you've seen things that maybe weren't actually there, because you're constantly in motion, and just you see the strangest things out your window sometimes, and you meet the most interesting people, and it's really just like this melting pot of all kinds of oddities. It's
interesting because you came to photography having looked at William Eggleston's work, and I think something that you noticed in it is how he pays attention to the little things and the mundane things in life and the things that we overlook, just how you say it. How has that affected you, and do you feel like you still have some kind of like mission of showing the unseen or the rushed by? Yeah, I don't feel like I have a mission of showing the unseen, but I do feel like I have to show.
There's this great quote that Michael Govan wrote in that essay for Silver Lake Drive, which said that you look at the extraordinary lurking in the ordinary, which I thought was like a really, really interesting take on it. I think that you're so drawn to characters, and you're so drawn to these distinct qualities and this idea of people kind of being so disparate, and what joins them together may not actually be like a interesting dialogue that they're creating, but you find them so fascinating that you can't help but keep looking at them and wanting to tell their story, even if you don't do it in like a very narrative way.
Right.
So for me, I feel like that's like what you're looking at. It's not necessarily like this like mission to make something that's mundane feel extraordinary. You kind of already think it is.
Yeah, it's true. Also, when I was prepping for when I had all the extras and family members and friends in their costumes, and we were just about to go on set, I usually do a last look and make sure that I like what we've put them in. And there's so much preparation that goes into it, and that the mustache is on crooked enough to be weird enough, and like I choose to have my friends and family interspersed because it really changes the dynamic on set and makes it more personal. But with this one in particular, a lot of the extras that I used have lived in Los Angeles for a really long time, or are from LA like I am. And because this was so much about it was like an ode to Los Angeles, a little love letter about memories and things that may or may not have occurred, but I feel them and I perceive them in my subconscious. And so I wanted to describe this to the extras. I got the group together and I explained to the group what this show was about for me and why it was important that we make it together. And I wanted them to bring their own memories of being in Los Angeles to their character, especially when we did Welcome Home, which is a big chaos, something gone wrong with some kind of disorder in the middle of a street. And I shot all of these on location with my production team. It was very challenging because I hadn't shot on location since the beginning of my career. So the light was constantly changing, and we had a lot of production design and to create the world that I had imagined for this. But you really feel that in the pictures. You really feel, I think, that everyone was very present on the shoot. And it was an intense week of shooting, and I think more than ever you really feel the presence of the individuals, even though that we've layered them with goop, the makeup and the fake sunburns and the prosthetic noses and the wigs and the production, all the crazy things that I needed in order to get that perfect center between what I remember and the dream, like LA, and then what's actually happening in the city. But I thought that's what made this really special for me.
That photo has and you guys will see it tomorrow, has a very strong composition. And you're talking a little bit about preparing those photos. Can you talk a little bit more about that preparation, and how much do you plan to have these people in that corner, and how do you think about a photo before you shoot it?
Yeah, actually, a lot of the people that worked on Play the Wind are here tonight. So it was a really big undertaking for everyone. I think especially because we were shooting on location, we couldn't control as much, and I think that's what made it exciting. Though it was really, there was so much design and thought going into it, and so much preparation, and so much that we couldn't control. And that's the way I wanted it. I really wanted to marry those two worlds and just see that energy, that outcome, because it was really supposed to be about my experiences and what's tapping into the confusion that I think a lot of people feel in the world today, and what we expect of things versus what's actually happening, or what we think is happening. And I think there's a lot of confusion going on, and I really wanted to tap into that, especially with Welcome Home. It's a lot about that, and as well as a bit of a dystopian feeling in a lot of it, because it's very beautiful, it's very colorful, and it's very well thought out and designed. But in the end, there's this feeling of not knowing, the unknown, and the unrest, and the unease, and that's a big part of it.
I feel like the unease is also because you really balanced.
Oh yeah, that's Lois.
This is Lois.
That's the other side of Rancho Mirage.
When we saw the cliff.
5 minutes earlier.
In your photo, I think what a part of the eeriness in your work is the balance between reality and the surreal aspect of it. Like you're talking about the fake mustache that you add onto people and the wigs. What do you expect from the viewer when seeing that? Do you want them to feel like they're seeing themselves in the work and not yet? Do you want it to feel like it's part of a dream? What's your vision behind that eeriness?
What do I want people to feel?
From the audience, yeah. What's the general feeling if you had to infer a feeling to the audience watching your work?
I mean, I want people to feel something. I guess what I want to feel when I'm looking at art that I appreciate and a movie that I love is I want to feel changed afterwards to some degree, even if only for a few moments. I want to feel like I look at things a little bit differently because I watched that movie or because I saw that painting. There's different degrees that I've been affected by art. The first one was, in the most intense, was William Eggleston, when my entire life changed from that moment forward. But there's been a variety of movies, and like The Red Shoes changed me forever. And I mean, I just want people to feel something, even if they walk away and they're just like mad at me for some reason, well, because I just don't want it to be dry. I don't want to leave people feeling like they didn't understand something and confused and like they don't really care because of that. There needs to be, like, the connection with an audience has always been number one for me.
And you included in your work, a lot of your work deals with crowds. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about your relationship with crowds.
I feel like it's mostly like I think a lot of it is about, I would say, like, the crowds, a lot of it is still drawn to like your interest in kind of like these individual characters. Like for you, the crowds are all about the people that make them up, correct? Right? I mean, it's not necessarily, I think it's just about like kind of her fascination, at least from what we've talked about, with those individual personalities.
Also the way that a crowd can make you feel.
Yeah.
It's they're either, it's depending on how I'm feeling emotionally when I'm in the crowd. I can feel inspired, and I can imagine, like, where is that person going, and where do they live, what does their house look like, where do they work, what made them decide to put that suit on that looks like they've owned it for 50 years. Maybe he used to be a young man and that's when he bought the suit after he got his first job. I don't know, there's like a million things you can imagine if you're in the right headspace to be able to confront the crowd. But alternately, if I'm not in that headspace and I'm feeling particularly vulnerable or sad or something, then the crowd can just trigger all kinds of fear, and my physical reaction of anticipating being in front of a crowd or amongst a crowd. There's all kinds of fear about crowds now too in just the world. Crowds don't mean the same thing to people. They don't feel as safe. So there's a lot of layers about how I feel about crowds. Individual characters, that's what you just said. It's just amazing stories that you can imagine for people. But the crowd is a whole layered, crazy, like, psychological space that I'm constantly interested in.
I think a good feeling of what you just talked about is that movie, like Ron Sortie.
The film, yeah.
The film, which, Fionna, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Sure. I'll just give like a brief intro. And do you want to talk about it, or do you want me to?
Oh, you can.
Okay, great. So Alex was commissioned by the Paris Opera Ballet to essentially make a film, and it was a massive undertaking, and it's one of the most ambitious pieces, next to Play the Wind, that I've seen from her. And a lot of it deals with, I would say, this idea of performance and the relationship between an artist and an audience, in this case, like a performer in the audience. And I think that it really speaks to how Alex's work always engages with the viewer, whether it's telling them that they can project onto the work itself or whatever emotions that it might infer. I don't think there's specific instructions. I think it's just about that give and take. And so this debuted in 2016, and it was first shown in Paris and then shown at our gallery in Christie Street.
I love the way that as an artist, you're talking about something that's so vulnerable. You're talking about an audience watching your work. Can you talk a little bit about the ballerina situation? And B, can you talk a little bit about how and if you see yourself and the performer in this case?
Yeah, I mean, all of my work is very personal in many ways. At the time, I was experiencing something called stage fright, and it came upon me very suddenly and without warning, and I was very surprised by it because I thought that I could control most of the things in my life, and when my body started reacting differently than my mind, I felt fine about the idea of going up and doing public talks, but my body was saying something else, and the little jitters that I would get would, and the sweaty palms, and just like all kinds of interesting things would happen, and totally out of my control. And so I wanted to make an expression about that, and the world of dance, and especially a prima ballerina. Emily Cosette started with the Paris Opera Ballet when she was 9 years old, and there's such an intense dedication to ballet, and The Red Shoes being one of my favorite films of all time. I wanted to use like the top pinnacle of performance and expression. I felt like it represented beauty and artifice in the most exaggerated form, because when you're far away, sitting in the audience watching these performers, they make everything look light and weightless and beautiful. Their makeup is always perfect, and the set design and the lighting and the music and everything is just like this fantasy. But then when you're up close and you're watching them rehearse, the point shoes on the floor have a very similar sound to a horror film, and the makeup becomes cracked, and the hair isn't hair at all, it's a wig sometimes, and there were just so many interesting, conflicting, juxtaposing things about the life of a ballerina, as well as the physical aspect of how it's like torture on the body, and they don't show it at all when they're dancing because they have such a passion for what they do that the mind becomes stronger than whatever physical pain they're going through. So there were so many things that I related to, but it was in the most intense form that Emily Cosette and other prima ballerinas and dancers experience it. And so I thought it was a perfect opportunity when Paris Opera Ballet asked me to make a film. This idea came immediately because I was going through this in my own little way with my tiny little audiences, and she was going through it on a worldwide scale. And when I found out, there were so many little interesting things that happened when I was making it, but I found out later that after I'd already cast her as the protagonist, I found out later that she had actually been away for 1 year, and this was, being in my film was her first dance back in a whole year because she'd had a baby, and so there was a little bit of anxiety for her because she had always danced, and this was her first break that she had taken for that long. As well as I really wanted the backdrop to be green. I had this strong idea that it had to be this green color. And so I was working with my production designer. He was in Paris and I was in Los Angeles for a bit of the pre-production before I went out there. And he kept sending me back these sketches of a blue backdrop, very varying shades of blue, but I was very specific, and so we were going back and forth like this for a while. I thought it was a language thing, sending color swatches back and forth, and finally he stopped me and he explained to me that it's bad luck in France to use green on the stage, and it's a superstition, and because I guess there was something in the paint that was very toxic back in the day, and no longer, but they still keep up this superstition about the color green, and I was like, ooh, even better. We've got to use green. I knew I was onto something.
The way you use sound in that video is also, I think you start with the anxiety starts when you notice the sound design. Like you hear her shoes, you hear the coughing in the audience, the little things that you notice when you just stop paying attention to your craft. How do you work with sound in your videos in general? Like when did you start working with it, and how do you feel like it's going as a visual artist?
Yeah, so sound design was an unexpected passion. It was, yeah, because for some reason I had always thought of film as picture with music. I'd never really given sound design any thought. And so when I did my first film, Despair, I was working intensely with my composer, and then I can't remember who said it to me, but it was probably my producer at the time, was like, and then we're gonna put footsteps in and the cracking sound of the glass and these other, sound design. And I was like, what are you talking about? The music says everything we need. We don't need sound. We don't need footsteps. The music, the piano does the footsteps. And so I had this moment of realizing there was, that's one of the things I love about film is there's so many. I love the collaboration with my team. Like I never would have discovered sound design otherwise. It sounds so simple, but the second I realized, like each component that you add to the picture it can tell a completely different story, or it can support the story that I was already telling through the picture, and it makes it that much stronger. So when I discovered sound design, even still, it's always, it's probably, my next film might even be with no music, because I'm so interested now in what sound design can do. And when I rewatched Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, there's no music in that, and I never even noticed because the sound design is so incredible. But the sound designer on Play the Wind is Chris Garbozio, and I work with the same composer, Ollie Helmvine, a lot on a lot of my films, and the two together, the sound design on Play the Wind is like, it's so many channels of. We're doing Atmos sound because there's a definite component of the atmosphere in this particular new film that's very important, and so there's a lot of places where it's just sound design, and he just did an incredible job.
A lot of your films, I think, are also, and you kind of established this, I think, with like Facing the Crowd as the 3-channel installation, which I think we have an installation shot of it on here, but a room that would basically immerse you. And I think that this idea of kind of your films not just being something that you passively watch, but something that you experience is a very ambitious kind of way of thinking about the medium. And sound works into that in such a natural way, because we are immersed in your vision and the atmosphere that you're creating. And that's another way that I think that you think about the audience in your work in a really, really interesting, and you're not isolated to one medium or another. You're thinking about it sculpturally, spatially, which is not what most photographers and filmmakers do, I don't think, very well. Yeah,
you really are. I was mentioning that word before, but you really are bilingual in both photo world and film world, which it's rare to see, I feel like, with photographers making films, because usually it's more of films that you kind of like walk into the gallery, kind of sit around and then walk away. Whereas this, if you walk throughout the film, you really need the beginning and the end to understand the story, because it is a story. You were talking, Fionna, about the sculptures, which I think is an important element, especially of your new show. You do incorporate certain ready-mades in your exhibitions. Can you talk about how you select them, and B, why the need to incorporate them?
This is like the first one. I guess the finger and
the finger one.
Yeah, this is, and I would.
Pretty much the first.
It's the first one. It's the first one. Alex can definitely talk the most to it, but I think that this is the first time in a gallery show that she's shown something like this. But it was in many ways working with Alex that you realize is that it had to be there. She had to be there. And in this space, it really creates an interesting dialogue with the photographic works as well as the film. So the space itself is transformed in a way that I think would not be the case if you only had the photographs and the film. And you worked with a collaborator on that, and on kind of like the production of that, and that was another element that kind of ties into the narrative of the body of work, the muffler men and this kind of like bygone era. So I think that you talked about at one point, she was kind of like the mascot for the series. She was like always there, and so she had to be there at the end. But I think it is, a lot of it deals with how you think and like the artistic like references that you're talking about too. You don't stick to, you're not just looking at photography and film, you're looking at sculpture. You've talked a lot about like other sculptors that you're really drawn to. You're talking about painters, and I think that creating this experience and this installation is actually what experiencing Alex's work is like. It's not just like a single still image, it's an experience, and as you walk through the space, the sculpture helps create that too.
Yeah, it's like we're walking into one of your photos.
Yeah, one of your worlds, yeah. But you're not allowed to see everything, just a little glimpse.
Exactly. I'd like to talk a little bit more about your editorial work. That was a commission, the film, yeah, we just saw. Can you talk more about the other commissions that you've had for editorials, for commercials, for any kind of direction that didn't come from your own mind?
Yeah, I mean, most of the collaborations that I've done have generally been creative control. So I choose my projects very carefully because I don't, the exhibitions that I do with Lehmann Maupin doesn't leave me much time for much else. But the collaborations that I do with other people are really important to me in that the first one I did, the first larger scale one that I did was with W Magazine in 2010. And I had been struggling with how to make a crowd photo for many years. There's so many negatives that were thrown away because the photos just didn't work out. I got groups of friends together. I got strangers together, outside, inside. I just couldn't make it work. And when W Magazine commissioned me to do a story for them, I knew that they had a budget that was bigger than I had had at the time when I was doing my experiments, and so I discovered that to make a picture, the picture the way that I wanted to of a crowd, you needed huge, like a huge crew of people. I needed a really great costume designer, Callan Stokes, where are you? And there was a huge, I mean, it was just it was the biggest set I'd ever created, but I realized that I needed each department to help me to dress all these people. Because before that, I was kind of trying to do everything myself. I was coming to a location, meeting a friend there. I'd have the camera in one hand, the reflector in the other. A lot of these shoots before that were done with a very small crew. And to successfully make that photograph, I needed W Magazine. I needed their help. I needed their support. And they let me have creative control. I told them that this was an art idea that I wanted to make, and it ended up in my new photography show at MoMA, and as well as a few other things, maybe not Despair, but yeah, Despair was at MoMA. So anyway, I use the opportunities of collaboration to push forward new ideas that I'm experimenting with, get more comfortable as a director on set, because there's always new challenges with film and sound and music, and it's really, I see it as an area that I can really play in and try new things, and also meet new crew. Like Rebecca Balzic did the costume design for Play the Wind along with Callan Stokes, and that was out of a project that we had shot together 2 months earlier for collaboration with a brand, and we never would have met, and then it happened that Callan was having a baby, and so she was only going to be involved for so long, and then so that's like I'm meeting new people and expanding my world through these collaborations.
And does the gallery weigh in at all on any of those selections? It's a different conversation.
No, definitely not. I would say that I think that, I mean, Alex and I have talked about it, and I think that it's great for her to have such a creative outlet for her to explore new ideas, and there's as long as you have great creative control, which I think allows you to kind of pick and choose what you want to do, it gives you an a room for experimenting, which I think sometimes the pressure of a show or the pressure of kind of like showing it in a very conventional fine art platform might be too much, because you're still testing out kind of like what you want to say or what you want to do, and that gives you the freedom to do it without the pressure that comes with kind of those set parameters. So yeah, we're not involved. We just get to experience. We just get to like watch her explore. Yeah.
There's another video that we have, Uncanny Valley, which is one that you did for W Magazine, but that was 2018. So that was the most recent work. Yeah, that was last year. Can we play it? It's short. Well, I guess all of those people are actors in the video, right? Professional actors, or do you have some that were just regular citizens?
Wait, sorry.
The video that we just saw in Uncanny Valley.
Oh, that was one person.
That was one person the entire time, right?
Just one.
Okay. How do you direct an actor compared to a regular extra that you have in all the other films that you've made?
I think with a very good actor, you don't really have to do that much. They kind of do it all for me. As long as we talk ahead of time and we're on the same page about what the story is, I just kind of guide. It's more of guiding, and usually I don't really have to do very much.
So it's more of a collaboration almost?
Absolutely, yeah.
And again, we notice another strong female character, or at least main character is a female. Do you include women in most of your work? I would say, is that because it's autobiographical, or how do you perceive the female form when you photograph or film them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really thinking about gender really when I'm shooting. I'm thinking about what I'm going through, and because I am a woman, it comes out very naturally that I'm telling a woman's story. But I'm definitely not speaking from an outside perspective of looking in at what it is to be a woman.
And I think in Play the Wind, there are very clearly two protagonists, one male, one female, and kind of like their relationship / their own narratives is, I think, a really big part of it. And while you do feature women frequently, there is, I think, especially since you started doing crowds, like there are always strong kind of relationships between male and female characters in your work. Yeah. Except for this one, which is women now.
Oh, this one, yeah, this one was intentionally all women.
Oh, this one, I never even realized that.
Yeah, and this one, I made this one when the conversation about gender kind of began recently, and this exciting time of what it means to be a woman right now, and to men also, what does it mean to be around women now? And I'm on the cover there of the magazine called Women Now.
The magazine is in your new show also, isn't it?
Well, yeah, my husband and I design a lot of the props, like fake tabloids and magazines together. So we thought that it was appropriate. I've never been in my pictures before, but this one was undeniable that I had to be that I had to be representative of the woman that made it to the cover this month. But you know, I really wanted to put all kinds of women in this picture because although I love a strong woman and I respect a strong woman, I also love that I'm allowed to be anything I'm feeling and any emotion and any way that any reaction. It's up to me to decide how to represent myself and whether or not I care about how I'm perceived. So I really wanted to capture the comedy of how women can be as well.
And the complexity of it. I mean, I think this idea of like one-dimensionality as a woman is so much like what we're subjected to throughout the history of art, like when women are the subject matter, and you're kind of making it a lot more complex, which I think is much more realistic. We're not one thing, we're many, many different things, and we can be many, many different things in one day, or in 1 year, or in a lifetime, and I think that that's much more, I think it also speaks to like a lot of your work is autobiographical, but you're also so tapped into universal human experiences, what it means to exist in the world in an emotional and psychological way. So while it is autobiographical, I feel like there is this universality to Alex's work, which allows the audience to also connect into it. So you kind of like bring us in that way too.
Yeah, it's generally about whatever is happening in the world, and inevitably.
I have a question for both of you. I'm always curious to hear more about a relationship between an artist Liza and someone who at the gallery kind of works with the artist and an artist. Like how, in what capacity do you guys work together?
Always. I don't know, I feel like in the last couple years we've had some like really major things that we worked on together, your book and your big survey show in Europe and then Play the Wind. I mean, I think that the gallery's role is really to foster a dialogue with the artists and make sure that there is, there is support for creative visions, that there are like
I can tell a little story, an example that I appreciate, but something that I was telling Carla earlier today. About a year and a half ago, I had done a couple of shoots, and I felt like I was onto something for my next show, and I was really excited. And I went to the gallery. I went to one of the directors of the gallery, Rochelle, or one of the founders, and she happened to be in Los Angeles, and so we had this meeting, and I showed her some of my new work that I was really excited about. And because she knows me, and she knows we've worked together for a long time, and there's been this dialogue, they know me very well. And I had been talking about something I was interested in for a while, and so she was expecting to see it. And I showed her some of the photographs that I'd made and tried to explain to her earnestly what my intention was if I continued on this road. And she just looked at me, and she basically, I don't remember exactly what she said, but she said, "It's not ready yet." And I knew that she was right when she said that. I knew that I was trying to take a shortcut. And if she had said, "You're not ready yet," and I disagreed with her, then that would have been a conversation, and I would have gotten Fionna involved, and it would have been totally up to me to show the work regardless. But I asked Rochelle because I respect her opinion, and we've known each other for a long time. And there's a handful of people that I show unfinished work to, and there's a couple people at the gallery that are a part of that handful. And when I showed Rochelle and she told me that, I knew she was right, and it made me realize that I was just at the beginning of discovering what my next body of work was going to be. And if she hadn't told me that, if she hadn't been honest with me about that, and I hadn't had the respect to process what she was saying and actually think about it and reflect on it in an honest way, then I might have put out a really shitty, unfinished body of work that just because I wasn't in the mood to take pictures, but because I didn't understand what it was to be a photographer right now for me, because I have a very complicated relationship with that medium, but because I was able to have that honest conversation with her and then go back and like cry in my room and then or whatever I did. But I realized that there was something bigger that I could make, and I just needed to figure out what it was. And a year and a half later, I've come back with Play the Wind, and I'm very proud of it. And Rochelle's, she's very proud of me and proud of the work. And so it was a huge undertaking, but it was totally worth it. And I think that's a good example of how the gallery and how our relationship works. Among many other things.
Right, I'm sure. Do you have any advice for young cinematographers or filmmakers or photographers?
Well, there's this White Stripes song called Little Room. And it's like, when you're in a little room and you're thinking of something good. But if it's really good, you're going to need a bigger room. Nah, nah. Anyway, it's like, that's really embarrassing that I just did that. I really needed you to know the lyrics to understand what I'm about to say. But anyway, that song to me always, and I don't know if this is really what they intended, but to me that song always meant that your idea is always going to get bigger than the room that you're in, or the equipment that you have available to you, or the like the idea is always going to be bigger and harder and more challenging, and you can't wait for the bigger room. You can't wait for the right equipment. You just have to do it, and then your room will grow to match the size of your ideas.
I like that. I think it's a really good advice. And I think we're going to open up the floor to questions. Okay, one question.
So I did hear someone mention painting earlier. Fiona, you might have said something about painting or sculpture?
Maybe. Yes.
Yeah. And I've been dying to ask you, and I love your work, Alex. Did you study painting? Are you looking at painting? I was starting to take little notes as I'm going through this mini survey of your work. And I'm thinking leitmotif and color and narrative and perspective and composition. And it's all there in every single image. And in every frame, the color is so meticulous. And it's compositionally, it's placed in such a way that the eye is constantly moving, and I care about what I'm looking at. I'm not desensitized to what's happening. I don't take a break from it. I'm compelled to look at it, and I'm just talking about it from a visual standpoint. So I'm wondering if you're thinking about film and photography in a painterly way, or am I just, you know?
Well, my sister is a painter, and we've collaborated in the past, and I've always been very drawn to painting and all art mediums. So you're not wrong. I mean, I didn't study to be a painter ever, but I've always appreciated painting and made, like, one of my works in Play the Wind is a direct influence of painting, and it's, you know, I like that the painters, especially Bruegel and Balthus and certain painters have told very contemporary at their time stories that exist and are relevant now. And so I'm trying to do the same thing, to put a timelessness in the work. That's why the costume design and the production design and the music and everything it's intended to feel like you can never quite put your finger on what time period you're looking at, but yet I'm speaking about very contemporary and relevant problems, and it's very important. They're very important to me right now.
Yeah, I'm looking at this and I'm feeling Edward Hopper, this disconnection. Everyone's together, but no one's together. Everyone is an individual. And the ballet felt like an Otto Dix or a Max Beckmann. Mm-hmm. I was in Austria during the Weimar Republic. It was just, there's just so much art in it. Magritte comes up a lot with the burning house and the eye.
Well, thank you. You're flattering me. This is, all of these painters are people that I admire very, very much.
Do you ever think about, or feature films in your future at any point? I ask somewhat selfishly because I'd love to watch a even longer video of yours.
I think that that's definitely something that I would like to do very soon.
One question.
Now that you've discovered sound design, when you look back on some of your original photography, do you hear components of mediums that you weren't aware of when you took the photographs, or do you wish that you could overlay sound on them now?
I never think about sound design when I'm making a photograph. I think there's so many. That's something that I discovered, that I mentioned it earlier, like a shortcoming of film, in that, to me at least, I mean, unless you're Paul Thomas Anderson or Robert Altman, it's not possible for me to tell more than one hero story at any given time in motion. I think that's a very specific skill that certain filmmakers have, and it's a very rare skill. So right now, my ability to tell many different stories through a still image is all I need. I don't need to put sound design on top of photography.
Yeah, right over here, I think it was on.
Hi. I discovered your work. I don't know, this might be weird, or maybe I'm just curious. I was very interested in film noir, and I was a big fan of Alfred Hitchcock or David Lynch and scary movies and that horror genre. And it somehow I stumbled upon your work when I was in school years ago, and you became one of my favorite photographers, because to me there was a bit of mystery, and there was like something playing with that horror genre. I don't know if I was reading into it, but I was wondering if that was ever an interest that you had, or if that was ever something that you wanted to like portray in your imagery.
Yeah, I always feel like there's something kind of lurking underneath. There's always something, no matter how good things are going, I feel like it needs that darkness in order to be able to really appreciate the good, because it doesn't last. And I know it's this constant harmony of the darkness and the lightness. And so from the very beginning, I've always been interested in that. And I think when I first started, pictures you guys will never see, I was much more on the horror, darker, just more carnival and obscure side of things. And I realized, this goes back to how important the audience is to me, though. I realized that people wouldn't really engage in that work. It was very early on, and that was a point for me that was pivotal, because the work didn't feel like it was done until I had an audience to engage with it. It felt like it was, if I made it, and for a while in the beginning, like when I first discovered photography, I was living in this apartment building in Koreatown in Los Angeles, and I would print my photos in my bathroom, in my dark room, and I would bring them downstairs in the middle of the night to the shared community laundry room, and I'd hang them around the laundry room, and then I'd run, in the morning, I'd run downstairs and see if any of the photographs were gone, because I figured that if somebody had taken one, then it meant that they liked it enough to steal it. And so that was those were my first art shows, I guess. And so that was like 6 months into photography. I was having my art show, and and so that's how important the audience is. So when I started making these pictures that were a little bit less engaging for people, I quickly pivoted, and that's when I started to try and be a little bit more subversive through color and beauty, and I was just trying to find a balance always. So right now I feel like me and my team, I'm constantly talking with my production team about it, just really trying to find that balance of timelessness, not distorting time, distorting beauty, never quite landing people in a totally comfortable place.
Do we have any more questions? Thank you, Alex and Fionna.
Thank you.